Okay.
And I'm recording.
So as you can see from the title here, we're here today to talk about a thing called AI skills. So what is that exactly? Well, first of all, it's not even called AI skills any longer. As of our Fabric conference last week, it's been renamed to data agents within Fabric. So that's first thing to know. It's had a name change already. And then the second thing to know is it is part of the Fabric stack. So in a moment here, I am going to do a little level setting on just what Fabric is for those who haven't quite seen it very much yet, before I dive right into that feature. So what exactly is this new data agent's AI skills feature? Well, it's really just a chatbot against your structured data. So since this is a SQL and BI user group, I assume everybody knows what a database is and what tables are and things of that nature. So if you've been following along with AI at all, there's a thing called the RAG pattern where you can build chatbots now against unstructured data like documents, et cetera. And so I'm going to go over to the whiteboard here a little bit and talk about that pattern a little bit, just to level set a little bit here. So let me grab this. And so the RAG pattern is basically this. I have a set of documents sitting right over here. I'll just take my time writing this out. And in the past, if I wanted a chatbot against something like this, I've had to do a whole lot of work. I had to maybe do things like set up question answer sets and things of that nature to try to make a chatbot work. And really, it worked on this keyword-based sort of technology where if I type in a question, I've got to hope it hits on a couple of words that I have out there in my questions. And if it doesn't, it's going to come back and say, hey, I couldn't do anything with that. And that's the world we lived in for chatbots. But now, with large language model technology and models like GPT-4 and the others you're hearing about, now it's been trained on the entire internet. So when you ask a question against something like this, it can take that into context and know what you mean. So when you talk about this RAG pattern here, if you have a set of documents like I put in my little blurb there, let's say these are just HR policies, and you have information such as your PTO policy and things of that nature, right? So I have a set of documents. What I have to do to get ready for this is I index this into a vector index. So that's step one and what a vector index is, it's a mathematical representation of a concept in text. And so I take my documents, I break them apart and I say, hey, put them in a vector index. The reason you're doing this is because if I ask a question against a large language model, it can only accept so many like characters we call tokens, right? Is what it's really officially called. But the suffice to say, it can only accept so much information for context. And so if I have 5,000 documents over here, I can't say for every question, look at all 5,000 documents and bring that back. So what we're doing here is you put this into a vector index, and there are a lot of these out there, including Azure offers a thing called AI Search now. SQL Server 2025 is actually going to have a vector index as part of its product. And so lots of vector indexes out there that you can use for this. And then once this is in here, now when I want to chat with this down here, here's my chat bot. And I'm going to type in a question here. It's going to come up here and it's going to hit the vector index and say return the things that match this to a certain number, because now it's going to take that and feed it over here to my large language model, ILM, and then it's going to come back and give me my answer in the very end here. So to set this up, I have a set of documents, I get them indexed here, I ask a question, it's going to hit this for its first initial answer, takes that over here, and now the large language model is smart enough to say, hey, based on your question, based on this additional stuff you gave me, I can answer your question, right? So I'll show this a little bit here real quick. Da, da, da. So just for context here, I'm going to bring up my M365 Copilot, where I can actually chat against a large language model here. And so if I were to ask a question right now with no extra context here and say, what is my PTO policy? What you're going to see by default, it really doesn't know how to answer that because this is just what it was trained on with the internet, right? So, but now if I give it extra context and say, US PTO policy is 15 days, and UK PTO policy is 30 days. And I say, using this information, answer this question. So in the background of this, you would be giving it this additional information. Now I ask my question, which is, I live in Wales. What is my PTO policy? And if everything goes right here, it should come back and say, look, 30 days now because I've given it information. So take that into context. What I did over here on the whiteboard is I said, I took a whole bunch of documents. I can't feed all that into that additional info there. So I need to break that down, right? So this is a pattern that a lot of people are doing with AI right now with just unstructured data. But what the AI skills feature is all about is, well, what about my structured data? Can I have something sitting in a database structure and ask questions like this against it and have it answer my question? And the answer is yes, with some effort. But the thing is, with data agents slash AI skills now, this is a product that Microsoft is actually building as part of the Fabric thing. And you'll see here when I show it in a moment that it's just out of the box and you can get off and running and using it. So that's it. Any questions or thoughts on any of that before I move forward here with the next thing here? Okay. Um, so that said, let's just talk a little bit, a level set what Fabric is exactly before I dive into AI skills itself. So you'll see here I'm bringing up my Fabric slash Power BI portal. Anybody who's worked in Power BI for a long time will know that, oh yeah, this looks like Power BI to me. But now with Fabric, what we've done is combine Power BI into this entire suite of tools. So I click on this over here. Well, what are these tools? So first of all, you have data storage. And so what this means is you could build a data warehouse in Fabric now. So let's say you haven't invested in something like Databricks or Snowflake or even Synapse with Azure over the last couple of years, and you say, I want to go build a new data warehouse. This could be your choice. And we offer different storage mechanisms here to do that. So I'll show you in a minute here this thing called the Lakehouse. But that falls under the data engineering bucket I'm pointing to here. If I go over here to the very right, there's a thing called a data warehouse. And the main difference between these two, which I'll show in a moment, is that if you come from more of a Python sort of coding background with data, most likely the Lakehouse is going to feel really comfortable for you, and that's what you'd want to do and use the Spark engine behind that. Whereas the data warehouse over here, this is closer to SQL Server experience, where you don't get Python coding, you just get SQL coding, and that's really the main difference between the two. What's behind both of them, though, is the fact that it's just a data lake storage behind both. And so with past products that had data lake as storage behind the scenes, you had to do a lot of extra effort to stand up that storage and things of that nature. But Fabric has been built to be a software as a service platform. What that means is you don't stand up like true things you'd think of as hardware or even services, really. You stand up Fabric as a whole, and now you have everything you see here on the screen as part of the suite of tools. And so the way the cost model works for this is you pay a monthly charge for the amount of compute you think you need to power it, and then it powers all of these things here. So when you're deciding, what do I want to do with Fabric, you might say, well, I'm not going to do a full-blown data warehouse, but I am going to import some data just to work with some things. I'm going to use Power BI pretty heavily, maybe. Maybe over here, I'll use some data factory to import some data. And so if you calculate all that, you can say, well, I need this much compute, and this is the cost for that. I pay that monthly, and then you get the storage behind the scenes with it as well. So Fabric essentially is just a set of compute and a set of storage that are separated. And so when you walk through the rest of the things you see on the screen here, when you see something like data science, for instance, you can literally build a machine learning model right inside of Fabric, for instance. So if I bring data in here to use for Power BI, if I'm building a full-blown data warehouse, the story here is that you just give it enough compute and everybody can coexist in here with one copy of data. So that's one of the big themes with Fabric is think of like the old school way of doing data warehousing with SQL Server. You might say, I've got my data warehouse on this server and I have so many compute, so much compute resources here. And now the data science team wants to do something with that data. Well, guess what? I'm going to build them a second environment because I'm afraid they're going to kill my data warehouse, right? Well, with this now, you just simply give it more compute to handle the load of everybody. Now, there are definitely ways to separate duties and all those things here, which we're not going to get into today. This is not a Fabric demonstration, but what I want to level set on, though, is the storage part of it, that to use this feature we're going to show here called data agents, you do need to bring data into Fabric to use this, right? So anyway, the couple of major things. Now, I will point out a third thing here. You see databases. Literally, as of just about a month or two ago, this went to public preview. We now have a version of SQL Server sitting right inside of Fabric. And so these other products I was talking about storage wise, those use data lake storage. They store the data as what's called Delta Parquet file format. And you don't have to manage any of that. It's just there and it manages it for you. All you do is say, I want to put data in there just like you would with SQL Server or anything, and it manages that all effectively for high performance. What this thing does, it actually literally has, really think of it as Azure SQL DB sitting right inside of Fabric. So it does have the proprietary database engine of SQL Server as part of it. And the cool thing about it is not only does it have that, but then once you bring data into that, it automatically makes a copy out to a data lake storage as well. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. You say, hey, I'm doing like a transactional thing with this SQL database in Fabric, and I'm using its compute to power it. And now it also makes an automatic copy over to data lake storage. So depending on the use case for the data you've captured, you have both now. And once again, I'm not going to dive into why you would use either one in either case today. There'll be other sessions for that, but this is something I really wanted to point out because that's one of the newer features that came out that I think is really interesting. And in fact, I had one customer in my day job here where they tried out the warehouse feature about a year ago, and they said, we noticed that we have to update about 5 million records, the dates across the board, and that seems to go really slow for some reason. And I tried it myself, and it's like, yeah, you're right. For some reason, that date time type within the data warehouse feature, there's something weird going on there. But if they would have had this database, they could have said, hey, I'll use this instead, and they would have had that issue, right? So it's like different types of storage come with different types of, roadblocks and things like that. So but anyway, so Fabric, hopefully what you can see here overall, it's an end-to-end data platform for storing your data, moving your data, processing it with something like Data Factory. There are three other major ways of doing that same stuff that I won't get into today. And then you see even down in the very bottom corner there, a thing called real-time intelligence, where there's a special type of storage for just think of IoT devices and manufacturing that are generating tons of data off all the machines and everything, or even in healthcare, if people are wearing wearable devices, you generate large amounts of data and you want to do kind of real-time analysis on that because it's a lot of data coming through. So to handle that, you need a really special type of storage that can handle that load, right? So that's what this is all about, is we even offer that right inside of Fabric. So the story here is you're getting data warehousing kind of workloads, you're getting transactional sort of workloads you can do in here. I can do machine learning with the data, and I can do this real-time intelligence stuff too. And of course, there's good old Power BI as your standard analytics tool. And a part of the presentation here, I will show a little bit about Copilot with Power BI today, just because I think it goes right alongside the data agent slash AI skills feature too. So anyway, I'll pause there for a second. Any questions or thoughts on any of that at this point? Okay, so let's see here. So one thing I'm going to show real quick is this thing called the lake house, just so you can kind of see it in action a little bit. So it's not just theory. So I'm going to go over to my workspace here where I have a few things created already. And I'm going to bring up this thing called a lake house. So I mentioned earlier how if you come from a Python sort of background, the default interface of this is going to look really familiar for you because you can see up here, I don't have a button for SQL queries or anything, but I do over here have tables. I have files, so I could upload something like a CSV file in here, and I could actually query against that, or I can turn it into a table, which at that point it becomes that Delta Parquet format in the data lake under the covers. And then to work with it here, I can open a notebook and I can write Python code and things like that. But I can also flip over to this thing called the SQL Analytics endpoint. And on the exact same data now, I have an interface that looks much more like SQL Server, just in a web format here, you can see. So now you can see up at the top, I have new SQL query. No longer do I have a button for notebooks and things like that. So the cool thing about this is if I have, if my data engineers are more Python oriented, I can allow them to use this and process the data and everything. But then me as the data consumer, if I'm more from a SQL background, I can come in here and use this front end on it, right, to do some data analysis before I go over to Power BI and start building reports or whatever, right? So this is kind of what working with a lakehouse looks like. From this view, it's no different than working with SQL Server, Oracle, or any standard relational database sort of interface, right? But under the covers, just remember the data is all stored in a data lake, though. So what that means too is there's no indexing, for instance. Like if you're going to join two tables with large amounts of data, you don't have even the option to put an index on that. The engine is optimized to store this in a way that you can work with, billions of records and be able to have it be high performing and everything without that. So that's the gist of it. And one little additional thing I want to show here real quick is this concept of shortcutting, just because this is pretty cool. So you'll see up here on my tables, I'm clicking on this thing called New Shortcut. And so what you'll see here is anything that comes with a data lake behind it, instead of having to ingest the data into Fabric, I can actually say, I want to reference that data sitting over in that other product. And the engines of Fabric are smart enough to say, hey, that data looks familiar to me because it's in a data lake format. So I can go work with it just like I had imported it into Fabric. And so you'll see here that even if I have data on Amazon S3, or even if I have data sitting on premises with an S3 compatible sort of product, which some people have, I could go shortcut to that. You'll see here Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 and Dataverse. So seeing these side by side, I'll just let you know that I'm working with one customer right now that's using Dynamics for their CRM system, which has Dataverse behind the scenes. And they also have done a lot of work over the years bringing data up into ADLS Gen 2 storage. So with them, I just said, well, for your first round with Fabric, just go use the shortcut feature over to all that data rather than building ETL processes to import all that data in. And they were off and running and working, right? So that's the beauty of this. If you have stuff in a data lake storage format already, you have no additional work to do to get up and running and working with the data. So, yeah. So all that said, so let's get into the data agent slash AI skills feature here. So now that I have data sitting in here, what can I do with it? Well, I can go build Power BI reports because that's there. I can build machine learning models, but so back to when I talked about the RAG pattern over here for unstructured data. Now let me pull up this feature here and show you what this looks like. So I want to come back here and so let's pull it up here. So this interface here, I'll walk through a couple of things. Over here, this is where you decide what data do I want to pull in here, and it's going to recognize all the data that. So if it's me logged in here, it's going to recognize, well, what data do you have access to, number one, and then for anything I can see, I can bring into this environment now. And you'll see here, here's the chatbot interface right here in the middle, and over on the right, if you've heard much about this AI stuff right now, a big part of it is what's called prompt engineering, where if like I try a couple of questions, things aren't quite working the way I'd want, I can come over here and give it some additional instructions that every time somebody asks a question, it's going to take that into account now as well. And I'll walk through that a little bit as I do this. So right now you're going to see here that I have no data chosen as far as these tables sitting under here. And so I'm just going to start here with this diabetes table. And so I'll show you real quick here where this data came from. Let me get to where I can pull this up real quick. And let's see. Here we go. Yeah, so this data set here is something that part of our fabric training, like one of the labs it has out there said, hey, pull this data set down to do some things and get hands-on with fabric and try it. So that's why it's sitting in my environment. And the way the data set looks, you're going to see here in a second when I show you the table, but you'll see the fields here have things like S1 through S6 for field names. It does actually give you more info and say, well, the real field names are this. So in a medical context, you might know that TC equals total cholesterol or something like that. But when I actually downloaded the data, though, here's what it ended up looking like in the end. It was the more messy field names here. So I have things like age, BMI. Most people probably are familiar with what those mean, but then I get to BP and I might even start wondering like, well, is that blood pressure for sure? Probably in this context, but who knows for sure. But then I get to S1. Well, no human being and no AI is going to know what that means, right? They're going to see that and say, what do I do with that? So, hopefully it's sinking in. If you haven't heard much about large language models already, they're really good at understanding what you mean by text, or even if you speak something and can translate that. But what they're not good at is just like any human being, they're not going to be good at translating something with no context. So that is where this little area over here on the right comes in, where I can give it some additional context to help fix that. But before I do that, let me just try a very basic kind of question to start here. So I'm going to say show average BMI by age. And so that's a couple of fields there. We'll call that exact thing. So just want to start really simple here to show how what's going to happen here. It's going to peruse that data model and it's going to hit on everything here because everything there does have context. So in a second here, you're going to get an answer. And then I'll show you like a few things that come along with this. So right now I'm in a development sort of playground here. You'll notice at the top there's a publish button that when I'm done doing all this development work here, I could publish this out and anybody could go use this chatbot now. But before releasing it to the world, I'm going to do a lot of work and make sure the kinds of questions I'm trying are working really well, right? So, but what you'll see down here, if I go down here a little bit, so this is going to show you that's the data it brought back, which is really the same data and presenting in the end up there. It's going to show you the SQL query it generated. So number one, somebody who's analyzing this should know SQL pretty well because that's what this thing is all about. It's generating SQL queries based on what you typed in here, right? So you'll see here, yes, it hit on the age field, hit on the BMI field, did an average around that, and even, gave this, an extra little name here because it recognized that average BMI is not the greatest, kind of header or whatever there. So pretty smart there to start with, right? But let me go ahead and clear this real quick just so things aren't cluttered. And let's try another one here. And so show average BMI by gender. And so what I'm doing here is I'm purposely typing a word that's not in these fields that you see here. So I'm typing in gender, but you do notice there's a field called sex here. And so most likely that's going to mean, binary male, female, or it depends on how you set the data up, right? But if I put this in here, this on its own is going to be smart enough to hit on the actual field. But I want to show you here in a second, the data is going to be a little messy on its own, and then we'll walk through what you're going to do about that. So give this a second here. So here's the answer that the user is going to see at the very top here. It says gender one is this and gender two is that. Well, what is gender one and two? So what happened here is you'll see is, so this shows you the data that it actually returned. And so you see the values actually are one and two. So what do I do about that? In the old school, you'd have to say, well, I need a mapping table. I need a mapping table called gender and one equals female, two equals male, et cetera, right? And then I've got to join those together to get my actual answer that I want. But instead, now what you can do is you can come over here and say for sex, one equals female, two equals male. And then I'm going to go ahead and clear this again. And let's just try that same question again and see what happens now. So show average EMI by gender. Here we go. And what's going to happen is it's going to be smart enough now to translate that and be able to come back and hopefully if everything goes right, because you see the little caveat down at the very bottom there, AI can make mistakes, right? So that's a that's a big thing you want. That's why I said you want to heavily test this out before you give it to the general public. But you'll see now it was now smart enough to say, hey, translate that to female and male, right? So just think of all the times where you got messy data and you had to give it that extra mapping table and or I had to rename columns or put a view on top of something and all those things you do in analytics and data warehousing. Well, now with this tool here, I'm just giving it extra context in a separate window over here and it's smart enough to pick up on this, right?
So
Yeah.
the data agent instructions, are you able to give it, instead of manually hard coding, are you able to give it a file that has the mapping in it? I don't know, either a JSON file, the YAML, it doesn't matter what it is, or a database table to be able to do that instead.
Well, right now, I think it's just this interface, but I could imagine maybe as it goes on that it might start to allow stuff like that or something. But right now, yeah, you just have to cut and paste and put it in here. But the thing is, like I said, this is a development environment. So when you put this out to the general public, you're not going to give them the ability to do this prompt engineering. You're just going to say, hey, I've done all that work already for you. Now this chatbot's going to be really good at answering these types of questions. And so you can see here, like what that means is over on the left-hand side, I've got a bunch of tables sitting here. Well, imagine if I had a database with 500 tables out here. Well, I could pick, 250 of those tables and make it part of this. And you can tell people, hey, this is our medical record system, or this is our finance system, or whatever the system is. And they would know that, well, that's the kind of stuff I can find out from that system. So I should limit it to that. I shouldn't be asking it what should I do when I go to Paris or something, right? And so, when you release your chatbot, that's part of it is you say this is what this chatbot is good, for. But over time, you start to, even expand these to where they cover just more and more things too, like a one-stop shop. But like I said, that the more you expand it, though, the more effort you're going to put in testing to make sure that I should be doing that, right? So anyway, let's just go through a couple more examples here because I think this is pretty cool here. So I'm going to clear this again, just like I said, to keep things a little clean. And I'm going to go down to this sales orders table. And so with this, I see a customer name there. So maybe this could join on this customer table up here or something. But I'm not, I see customer key on this one, but I don't see a customer key on the other. So if I'll just not even try this, I'll just tell you, if I try to say, show me sales orders by state, and I pick those two tables, it's going to come back and say, yeah, I tried my best to do something with that, but I really couldn't figure out a way to join those two tables up. And it's smart enough to know that. It's going to say, like, I have a name field here, but over there you have first name, last name fields. I'm not just going to assume that those should match together. So instead, I'm going to tell you, no, not good enough, right? But if I do have two tables with a customer key field, it's going to say, oh, yeah, definitely, use that. So, but real quick, I'm going to show that in a second, but let's just do this real quick. So in the sales orders table alone, I have, let's see here. Well, actually, I'm going to use the customer table. So let's see here. So I have customers, I have things like where are they located, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to go ahead and pick that table and just say something like show number of customers by state, something like this. And it's most likely going to be smart enough to do this every single time, but let's let that finish. Da-da. So there we go. But this is what I want to show here. So I can keep, I could have done this from the first question. I could say, hey, only show people in the Western United States, for instance. But instead, I'm just going to keep having a conversation and say, filter this down to Western United States. And let's see how smart it is just to keep the conversation going. The first iteration when this released, it wasn't very good at doing this, like keeping the conversation kind of going like this. But now, yeah, you'll see here, it even gives you a little context up top. It says, yeah, typically the Western United States is made up of these states. So that's why I'm filtering it down to this. And so if this was not good enough for you once again, well, I'll come over here and say, well, what do I think does the Western United States mean, right? But even without me doing that, it was trained on the internet once again, the large language model behind all this. So it's seen plenty of articles out there that say, oh, yeah, Utah is considered the Western United States, right? So that's how it's getting to this answer here. So, all right. Yeah.
You mentioned the last time that you tried connecting the customer table and the customer orders table. It's gonna be sales orders table. It's gonna be like, I can't find the customer key in this because it only has customer name. But if you like give the agent instructions that use the name field.
Yeah, you could do something. Yeah. Let's say, for instance, that customer name field, that's one singular field, had like last name, comma, first name. You could probably go over there. I haven't tried it, but I'll bet this would work because most of the time when I try things like this, it does actually end up working, which always shocks me still to this day, but it does. But if you were to say, well, over in the other table, take last name, comma, first name, and make that format, right? It most likely, I'm not going to try to, I could do it here real quick and we can see what happens, but I know what you're going for though, that, yeah.
Also as a follow-up, having done that once,
Yep.
will the LLM already put that in its parameters now, knowing that without the agent instructions next time, when it encounters such a query, it's going to do the same thing. It's gonna try, at least so that's doing that.
No, and the answer is no, because the large language model itself is what it is. It was trained by the company, GPT, right? So they're the ones that did the OpenAI, I should say, right? They're the ones who built the model. It is what it is. Now you can use it in this way. And so when you think of machine learning, when you said I'm going to train a model, it was this really complicated mathematical process where I feed it data sets, usually have to be really large data sets to really be effective. And then I've got to keep on trying it against different base models and all this. With this, when we say training the large language model, it's really just this extra context over here. That's what you're doing to train it, right? And of course, you're giving it, in this case, these tables over here. So the tables and their column names and all those things, that's part of the training you're doing, but you're just doing it on the fly, right? And so it's not like now you can take a large language model and you can retrain it and custom build it from there. But what most people are finding from research of that is that it usually doesn't turn out to give you much better, output than what you had already. And that just using prompt engineering like this is really the way to go most of the time. Yeah, so anyway, when you say save it though, once I put all these extra instructions over here, that's going to be saved in this chatbot from now on though. So what it means is when I ask a question, it's going to say, hey, also pull that stuff over here into every time I ask a question. So, you could, if that's where I say if you get too broad with the amount of tables in here, you might have a bunch of instructions over here now, and you might want to break those up and to separate things a little bit at that point. But yeah. Yeah.
So when before you were talking about customer number, let's say, or customer ID.
Yeah.
And you had that on two tables and it could join. What if the definition is integer on one and bar chart on another? Is it going to do an implicit conversion or is it going to say, do you really want me to join?
I haven't tried that, but like at least we can show here what it can do if I do have a good table structure here real quick. So let me pull this up real quick. So down here in this where I'm going to go ahead and say get rid of that. Down here, I have a fact sales order table that does have a customer key field now. And I think in this case, this is an integer. And I know what you're going at. You're saying, well, what if over here it's a varchar, right? I haven't tried that, but once again, I wouldn't be shocked if it was able to kind of just do that conversion. But something I'll actually try. I just don't have a table set up, or I would try that one right here on the fly because I'd be interested to see what'll happen. But But down here on this one, just real quick, just to show. So here, I have my customer. It has a customer key there. Then I have my date table with the date key. I have my product table. So now I could do something a little more complicated. Just say something like show, let's say, sales by, let's say, product category. Well, actually, let's start with, yeah, let's just say product category. And let's see what's in my customer table. Let's just say city. Um, and what else do we have here to work with? So by product category, city, let's say product name as well. Let's open that table real quick. So I have a category, I have product name. So let's do that. I'll put it that way. And then I'll say for the year 2000, I think 22 is in here. Well, before I do this, let me copy and paste. Let me copy this over to the side real quick. Da, da, da. I'm going to park this right here so I can just bring it back rather than type all that out again. Let's just check real quick and do a little pre-data analysis here and say, I actually haven't picked any tables yet, have I? So I need to actually pick these. And I can say what years are in the dim date table. And I could have just gone out to my warehouse interface and run a quick query over there to find that, but just want to show, hey, if I'm right here working here, why not just kind of do it this way too, except for the fact that you can see it's not quite as quick as if I just done a, so you see here it comes back and tells me, yes, I have those 2 years in here to consider. So that said, I'm just going to do this. And for the year 2022, and let's just see what this generates real quick. And so this time it's going to be smart enough to link all these things up because you have all the appropriate key columns and everything, and it's going to be smart enough to recognize that. Oh, but actually it comes back and says this is irrelevant. So, well, rather than wasting time here, just suffice, like I tried this myself just last night and actually got a really good answer. So you have to trust me on that. So rather than try this 3 different times and have it bomb out or something, but so that what it comes down to is like, yeah, to make this really work is, yeah, your field names matter. The actual data matters because if I don't have customer keys that match up, it's not going to be able to match up things. And because, it's all the same stuff you encounter when you're writing SQL queries, right? That if I go to write a SQL query for Power BI or for an application or whatever purpose, I have to have a good data set to work with to start with, so nothing's changed about that, but it's even more important than ever now because it's trying to look at the names of these fields for context and everything too. So rather than me having to come over here and do a bunch of extra work over here, it would be nice if my, column names are already good, but we all know in the real world that's not always the case. So for instance, just to show what I did here with this table back to the diabetes thing, I'm going to copy and paste something out of here real quick. And this just shows, so what I did, I went ahead and just defined, well, what do all these fields mean here, right? And so I plop these in here. And so now I'm going to go ahead and clear my chat once again. And I'm going to keep those tables selected down below. So now I have a bunch of sales data and diabetes table data happening here. And I can say something like show average TC by age. And so once again, like right here, I have typed total cholesterol for this S1 field, but this is the power of the large language model. It's going to say, I'm going to look at this. And I think you're doing a medical context thing here. So when you type TC, I'm going to assume you mean total cholesterol, right? So let's go ahead and run that real quick. And hopefully this I just didn't do something weird and cause everything to bomb out here going forward, but da, da, da. And to wrap this up, I will just show the query that gets generated here so you can see what fields it actually hit on and everything once again. So this is me as a developer checking out, well, what actually happened here. Well, look, it actually did get my average on my S1 field, and it was smart enough to do all that. And in fact, it gave it a nice little name there once again and all that. So, yeah. Yep. So, the more data you bring in, the messier the data is, the more you're going to put stuff over here. But the cleaner your tables and data are over here, the less you have to give it extra instructions, is what it comes down to. And the same holds true when I showed, the whole document rag pattern over here. The better your data is, the better results you're going to get and all those types of things. So, if you have 5 different documents talking about PTO, for instance, and they really clash on the information, you're probably not going to get, very clear, answer back. But if you have one concise document outlining everything, it's going to be really smart at, when I did the little example in M365 Copilot, if it has really concise instructions, it's going to be really good at that. So, yep. So, any questions or thoughts on any of this? This is really what this feature is. I mean, to me, this is mind blowing because the next thing I want to talk about, I'll pause before I do so, but I just want to talk about the impact this could have on, like SQL Server reporting services type reporting, paginated reporting, and things like that. But before I do that, any questions or thoughts at this point? Here. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of maybe it's out of context of what you're doing right now. I know there's a lot of
Yeah.
data, but like, can you ask it right now, like what age group is at risk of high cholesterol?
Well, let's try it. Yeah. And once again, I think it potentially is going to be good at that because it was trained on the internet once again. So it's going to have read some article out there that said, this is what's risky, right? So let's say, yeah, what age group? Is this what you said? What age group
What age groups
is at risk for
are
what?
high cholesterol?
High cholesterol. Let's see what happens here. And I think this might actually, yeah, so here we go. It's kind of saying based on the data we see out there. And so what does it say here? So it's saying I have higher average total cholesterol than based on the given data for more detailed medically. Yeah. Yeah, so somehow it decided that 183 and above was the magic number of what the data out there, and so it gave you an answer. Now, of course, you trust and verify, right? It's like, that's the thing with AI. That's so to me, the point of this is like it's more about data democratization. It's like rather than people at your organization having to always run to the reporting team and say, "Hey, I'd like to go peruse my data we're capturing out here." And what I've always been told over the years is, well, to build that report, it's going to take me 3 weeks or 3 months because I have 25 things on my list of to-dos already. Now you can offer something like this that gives them a portal into it with a lot of caveats saying, don't trust it as gospel, right? But trust and verify. And then to me, it's also going to kind of improve the conversation between end user and report because now they can come, more equipped even with more information and say, hey, I was trying this chat bot and this is what I encountered and things like that. But any more like with what you're asking there?
No, I was just curious. I mean, because like,
Okay.
I don't know what 183 is high or not, but
Right.
as you said, the trust and verify. I mean, how do you know that 183 is high versus, maybe 206 is the right number?
Yeah, well, this is where my next step here would probably be, let me go out to my general GPT model here outside of that and say, what is considered high cholesterol? And even with this, like you're going to trust and verify, but the nice thing with this is it is going to point to actually articles that it used behind the scenes to get to that. So let's see here. So here we go. So you see here with this, you're going to get references. So just like if you had done an internet search for this stuff, you're going to know what articles it came from. And when I say trust and verify, it's like, well, if I see an article, can I trust that? And so you see, well, who was the author of that article and what's their background? So you keep on doing more and more research. But that's a nice thing here is you could drill into one of those articles and say, well, I see the author, tell me more about that person. And then you're going to get more information. And it's just a matter of how much do you trust any information, right? And so, if you turn to your buddy next to you at work and ask a certain thing, like, do you really trust how they tell you to do something? I mean, that's why when I talk about AI, I say, think of AI as just another human being because we're all fallible, right? I mean, I don't know everything. You don't know everything. Maybe you do. I don't know. But But the gist of it here is, though, can this do something that a human could do that's a really mundane task every day, right? And things like that. And if it can, 90% of the time, you have to say, well, would a human being get it right more than that? And if the answer is no, then it's like, well, yeah, do it with AI. Let them do something that's more innovative for my company or something, right? So um, I see you had your hand up there, Lovato, too.
Question about
Yeah.
your data. Like, is it easier or even more difficult to, if you have all of your data, like at Snowflake, for example,
Mhm.
how do you go about that? Do you have to like manually copy everything over? Is there a way to connect to it?
So there's a feature in Fabric called mirroring. And so have you worked with tools like Fivetran if you're in the Snowflake stack? So like Fivetran is well known as an ETL tool that's all about change data capture and keeping a real-time copy of your data going. Well, in Fabric, we have a thing called mirroring. And in fact, we have a mirror for Snowflake. So if you hook that up to your Snowflake environment and say, I want to copy 275 tables down to Fabric, it's going to keep a real-time replication of that going. Now, the one caveat I will tell you right now as things stand is if your Snowflake is behind a private endpoint, it's not going to work because right now the way Fabric works, it can't interact with that. But if you're willing to keep it like a part of it open to the public and lock it down just to certain things, then it's doable. Yeah. Otherwise, yeah, you would use a traditional ETL tool like Data Factory or SSIS or anything, right? To go pull your data down. But yeah. Yeah, so when I said earlier that I kind of quickly said, I showed you data factory sitting there. Mirroring is another way to do ETL of data in the Fabric. And right now we have it for Snowflake, for the past versions of SQL in Azure, meaning Azure SQL DB and Azure SQL Managed Instance. So you can do real-time replication from those and Cosmos DB. And on the roadmap to be generally available, I think by the end of this year now, is going to be mirroring for on-prem SQL as well. So if it's on a VM, whether it's an Azure, on-prem, wherever your SQL VM is, you'll have mirroring for that as well. And so this is stuff our product team just keeps on adding to that feature. And it's all also on the roadmap for Oracle too, because everybody has Oracle of any size company, right? So we're building that one as high on the priority list as well. Yeah. Yep.
So do they have stored GUI or days or BI? How are they interacting?
All with it, with the AI skills feature, it would just be, so if I go back to this again real quick, it would, when you publish this, all they're going to see is really this thing you see in the middle here. They're going to have a page that has a chat bot on it here, and and then they'll start asking questions. That's all they're going to see, really. So they're not going to see the actual data that's over here. They're not going to see this. They're just going to see that. Yeah. And in fact, let me just see what happens here if I go ahead and publish this. Um, Update latest changes. You can't undo this. What's this?
They don't need to select tables. They only have the chat part.
Well, so I haven't tried this yet, so let me go ahead and publish this and let me go find it over here. This should be in my workspace now. And let me see if I can actually, well, let me try this again. Hmm. Don't know where to go find that exactly. Let me try one more time here. Let me see if maybe there's a filter on something up here. So data agent, data pipeline. Yeah, unfortunately, I can't find it right now, but I'm 95% sure, let's put it that way, that yeah, well, the whole point of this is don't let the end user pick anything, right? Like let the developers who developed it kind of make those decisions and working with a business analyst, of course, not just the developer alone, but work together and say, for this chatbot, what data do I want it to use, first of all? And then for all that extra prompt engineering, they would have all that in there ahead of time. And then when you publish it, it's going to just take all that into context now. And then you would put it out there, like let's say you surface it on Teams or wherever you put it or something like that. Well, I shouldn't go that far because right now There is not an API available for this yet, but it's coming where I can, once I publish that, I could have an API behind it that I could go publish that to really virtually any interface now, right? So whether that be Teams or a website or whatever. But yeah, the end user experience is just going to be you would give it an extra little description and say, hey, this chatbot is all about diabetes data. So they would know, like, hey, if I ask a question outside of that context, I'm probably not going to get an answer at all. And if I do, not a good one, right? So that's really and it's intended to be that way because I think any chatbot. Now, the thing is, if you have power users out there that you say, I want you to have the flexibility to do whatever you want, you would just let them come in here and use this development interface. So like you have a choice there. And the nice thing about it is once you set up that thing out here, you can just say like, yeah, I'm going to allow these people into this workspace so only certain people can come in and use it and things like that too. Yeah, so if you wanted that, that's how you would handle it. You would allow them just to have what we're seeing here. Yeah. But with the caveat that, hey, like you're really playing around now, so be careful like what decisions you make based on this and everything, right? So, yeah.
Maybe something you're gonna show next is there, let's say you have blobs, JSONs or PDFs, whatever it is, how good is the Explorer and, working with that data? Is that on the roadmap?
I heard so last year, we were talking earlier, I went to the Fabric conference last year. They said at the conference last year that unstructured data was on the roadmap to bring into this feature. I haven't heard anything about it since then. So, I mean, I can go, find that out, but I haven't seen it specifically in our public facing roadmap for Fabric or anything. So when they said that, I went, so you mean you're going to do what I wrote up on the board here, which people have to do. I mean, this is pretty easy to set up for most people who work in technology, but still, it's an effort. It's things to maintain. If you were to be able to say, so I'll go back to the screen real quick to my lake house. So I think what you're getting at here is if I were to bring a bunch of files into this files area, could I hook that up to those, right? And so when I saw that, I was like, well, does that mean they're automatically going to vectorize those into a vector index and everything? Because there are ways with our AI services now where you can say, hey, I'm going to upload like these 15 documents and build an agent quote on it. And so it does not use vectorized stuff there. It's just saying use those files directly and things like that. Well, if you get too many files, like I said, that's not going to work so well. So that's why I wonder, like, so you're telling me if they're going to make this effective, it would almost have to automatically vectorize it and everything in some way too, right? But I heard it was going to be on the roadmap, but I haven't seen it yet. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe you're gonna talk about this too, or RLS, role level security.
Yep.
Would that be automatically as a part of the list of tables in the backend development that we add, and then they'll just get applied whenever a user asks a question?
Absolutely. So let's an unrealistic example, for instance, if I were to say that you're logging in and you're only allowed to see people that are age 50 and above in that diabetes table, let's say that's the row level security you put on it, it would respect that. So once you set row level, column level, table level security in Fabric, every feature you use on that data respects that security. And we only give you the option to use Entra ID security for it too. So you don't have an option like a SQL login that I can do or something like that. It's only Entra ID based. And so that means I only have one way into this thing. And every part of Fabric respects it. Yeah. Including this feature. Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, real quick, I said I was going to talk about the SQL reporting services / paginated reports kind of effect here. And so I just brought up some examples here, and hopefully I still have this up. Yeah. So I'm thinking like in the past when I built SQL reporting services reports, sometimes I built something really simplistic. Like somebody said, I just want a list of our employees with, 10 identifying fields about them and maybe a couple of pickers, that could filter down the department or something like that, right? But to me, that's an example of I built a report that really only answers one question, right? And so my point, what I'm going to get at here is hopefully you saw with that thing, I can point that chatbot to as many tables of data as I want. And so rather than me trying to figure out, well, what are the 55, 75, paginated reports I would build across that data, to me now, like just offer one chatbot against all of it and allow people to ask whatever question they want and see where it goes, right? And so I just found this real quick just for an example of how this one's pretty. This is a Git repo out there of some reports somebody built that said, "Hey, I want to look at my reporting services data itself," and so this one here is pretty sparse. I mean, you pick your database and server. So most people would see this up here and they'd understand what all that is. But I saw another example out here that kind of blew my mind. So this was somebody that's trying to answer more than one question, right? They're trying to say, I'm going to give you every possible picker and data input I can give you on one report. And I don't know if you've all been through this, but every time I try to build a report like this because somebody asked for it, they could not even use it. There's like, I don't even know where to begin with this, right? And so my point being here that rather than trying to build this kind of complexity to make it where it can answer 50 questions, just put a chatbot on the data and now it can most likely handle it, right? And then if they run into an issue, this is where I started saying earlier, if they say, hey, this thing's still not answering my question, can you help me out with a report? Now you filter things down where hopefully more people are saying, hey, I'm getting my answers over here, all good. But then you just have a few now coming to you and saying, I need something, more static, right? So that doesn't mean report service could go away or paginated reporting goes away. It just means I could see it taking a big bite out of this. And think about the factor of if you've seen a reporting services structure, it's going to look like this, right? Where I come out here and I've just got this huge folder structure sitting out there. Well, this is something that every company I worked with that been doing this for several years. Yeah, they had a folder structure that looked like this. It might go 10 layers deep in some cases. And how is anybody ever going to find those reports, right? So that's the other factor to me is like, even if you do build all those reports, does anybody even know they exist? And I think with AI now, you could build a better search on top of this with something like on the board here, but but that's the only hope. I mean, it's so time and time again, it was time to upgrade SQL Server. Well, I didn't want to upgrade SSRS along with it. What are all these reports all about? Nobody knows, right? They built them. A lot of them were built for three people that asked for this one report. They're gone from the company now and all that stuff, right? So.
How else do we get data to Excel?
Right. Well, you can get creative and do stuff with that. I mean, no doubt. Yeah. I mean, it's because, so this out of the box feature here, I'm showing you that it is what it is, right? I could copy and paste data out of that, put in Excel or something. But I think if you want that functionality, you could do a little bit of coding and say, hey, leverage that to get my data return. Now, give me a button to say output that to Excel. And that's when I said earlier when we were just chatting, I think this AI technology now, like any development you want to do around this can literally take you hours to build like the stuff you want to do because it's usually about just doing one really highly powerful thing, but it's not a complicated set of coding. And on top of it, I can go to my chatbot and say, generate the C# code to do this, and it gets it 90% right on top of all that, right? So, I mean, the world's just changing so fast for developers now. And I think if you're not taking advantage of it, you're kind of, this to me is like if you say, how do I get ahead in a company? It's like, well, now think of the productivity you could have if you take advantage of this stuff, right? While everybody else is still sitting back and going like, I'm not going to do that until my boss tells me to or something, right? I mean, there's no reason if they've given you something like M365 Copilot inside your company, or you can just go outside company resources and go to ChatGPT and do the same stuff too. Hopefully companies are blocking that, because OpenAI could take your data and use it. You don't want that within a company. But this is why you come to Microsoft for those services, because we wrap the security around it and everything. And we give you the guarantee that we do not use your data for training models and everything. Because if you've kept up, we are building models ourselves, right? We're building small language models and other things. But our guarantee is we do not use customer data for any of that training. So in healthcare, of course, that's really important, because what if somebody does accidentally put in a patient's social security number or something? If you do that on a public facing thing, that's going to go be stored somewhere, and you just broke, not the law, but some regulation, right? But whereas with Microsoft, you have no way of breaking any kind of regulation because we don't use that data and we guarantee that, right? So. And not that we're the only one guaranteeing that kind of stuff, but I'm just saying if you're going to get into AI, you want to do it with a trusted tech partner that gives those kinds of guarantees, right? So. All right, well, that's my little reporting services spiel there. Like this just hit me one day as I was playing around with it, going like, oh my God, this could really just, it's not in any of our marketing material. That just kind of hit me one day. I just went, wow, I just think of all the reports that I and people on my teams in the past built and everything, and go, now I could just put a chatbot on data and say, go for it. With a little, testing ahead of time. Don't just maybe open it up to everybody, but to Julie's point, though, for power users, give them this interface and let them play around with it too. There's nothing that says it has to be a technical person that builds this stuff either, right? Because they're not writing SQL code or anything. Now, they could go down and have to analyze the SQL, but I think they don't necessarily even have to analyze the SQL. They just have to verify the answers look good, right? So I could see where you'd have a business analyst build one of these chatbots to a degree, right? So. But you have to get comfortable with that. Yeah. Yeah.
Taking your data and putting it together, but it's in a secure environment, so nothing goes back to ChatGPT.
Yeah, and really what it's doing, it's not necessarily like, so when you use AI skills, if I were to ask it, tell me what are some good things to do in Paris, it's not going to be able to answer that because we wrote it to say, don't use the general model itself to answer anything, only take the customer's data into account for these answers, because that's what it's supposed to do. Now, if you build a custom thing, it's up to you to decide, do I want it to have a combination of both or whatever? But with this particular tool, no, they said it right up front, only use the data they picked on that left-hand pane there for the answers. Yeah. We'll see with that. Okay, so there's where it's getting a little fuzzy because yes, it's using your data, but it's also, yeah, in a way it is using what it was trained on to even determine that. Just like, well, even deciding what's the Western United States, right? So you're right. So it kind of depends on I guess what it comes down to is it's going to use your data and enhance it with something. But when I've tried things like, for instance, well, I'll just do it. I'll show you so you can see what happens when I do this. Da, da, da. So let's get back to this. And I'm gonna clear this out. And let's just say, okay. So yeah, show me things to do in Paris. Now this one's interesting. I think it's going to pop up. We have some things out there where you can actually bring in some additional tools to enhance this, I think. So there's content here that I can't work with. Yeah, so you see right here, it just tells you that it try to look at your data first. Whereas if it did find stuff with your data, it would now enhance it with what it knows in addition, right? Yeah. Yeah.
So like anything like Fabric, embedding this into like a Power BI report, so they can users can get more insights as they are looking at a pretty structured report, is possible, right?
Yeah, well, in fact, let's go over and look at Power BI here real quick. Just I'm going to go ahead and close this out and close this. And I'm going to bring up this warehouse over here real quick. So this lake house and warehouse, just so you know, Power BI needs something like a semantic model to work with. If you've built Power BI in the past, like pointing to SQL Server, you know the first step is always, hey, what tables do you want? How do they relate? You've got to define all that. Well, that's building what's now called a semantic model. And the way it works in Fabric is you can build these models right here in the interface. And in fact, I always highly recommend with customers get in the game of building these semantic models for reuse across the company, put them in a workspace where everybody can share and things like that. So that gets rid of hopefully the issues like two different people build a similar model, but they're slightly different. People wonder why the reports are off and all that, right? So if you can get into this mindset of, hey, build a finance semantic model that defines that, then there's less danger of that happening, right? But that said, what comes to like one with the warehouse here with these tables that are in here, you get a default semantic model. So when I come up here and I say, I want to go build a new report now, it says, hey, you were on that screen. So I'm going to assume that's the semantic model you wanted. And so you see here, it's like that set of sales tables I had with the customer and date and product and everything. And so very similar to the IA skills here, I can come in here and use Copilot and you'll see here, it gives you lots of stuff that suggests things that you might want to try to do. But I'm just going to start do my own thing here and say, show sales by product category and just hit this. And so just like it was happening with AI skills, it's going to peruse this data model up here. This is actually going to know without even guessing how the tables relate now, because you've defined that in your semantic model. You said the customer key is what it links on and those things, and it takes advantage of that, right? And so with this, I said, show that. So it didn't actually build a report for me because I wasn't smart enough to tell it to do so, but it came back with an answer here. I could keep chatting with that, but instead I'm going to say, well, now that I saw that, I'm going to say build a page showing sales by product category. And so this time around, it's going to actually go over here and build a page, and you're going to see it generates a bunch of graphs and charts. So this is kind of step two when I said democratizing your data for your end users. I mean, to me, like if you combine this interface now with that other, if they're more visual, they could say, hey, I'll work with this and I want to get more visual answers. Whereas somebody else that's more, text-based thinker or whatever, they're going to like the other one better. And so now that, this is the development environment for Power BI. So I think it's kind of a step to say, do I really want to make this an interface for my end users to kind of just on the fly do things like this? But to me, I think it's a discussion to be had because it's just like the other tool. It's like, hey, come in here and this is a semantic model that you have access to. We've already verified this is good data and everything. So what's the danger to me of letting people come in here and do it if you've applied all your security and all those things, right? So, but sometimes when I do this, it actually builds a thing that generates as many as 12 graphs and charts out here. And so to me, from a developer standpoint alone, this saves you time because I generate this. Let's say there were 5 other things on here. I could pick and choose and say, well, I don't like those. I'm going to delete a couple of things. I'm going to change this one to a pie chart instead because that's more appropriate. And so you can see how for a developer, it helps productivity. But I think the real power of this is, once again, democratizing the data for your users, right? And I think the goal here isn't for them to go build their own reports or anything. I think that's still, leave that up for your analytics team for that. But hopefully they can play around with this with the data agents feature, and they come more equipped to, like I said earlier, to come to you and say, hey, I really want to do this now. And they have a lot more information rather than, yeah, I'm kind of looking to do this, but I don't really know what I want it to look like. And, you've been through that, right? And so now I think you're going to have much better conversations potentially too. So. Yeah, so there's that. But let me just show a couple of other just AI kind of related things around Fabric here real quick. So that's, Copilot right inside of Power BI. for those who don't know what Copilot is, if you haven't kept up, basically Microsoft in every product we have, we're putting this thing called Copilot in it, and it's up to you whether you want to purchase it or not. In Fabric, it just comes with it at a certain level. Um, but so basically what it is, it's supposed to help you be more productive in that thing. So let's say in Microsoft Word, if I want to go generate a 3 paragraph thing, then I can just tell it to go do that and it does it for me. And you've seen the stories, I'm sure, of kids that are out there generating term papers with it and whatever, right? But in a business context, though, I already have people that, VPs and C-level people at like Centene and things like that will say like, yeah, I kept putting it off trying it and I finally did one day. And it said like, yeah, I've got to generate stuff like that all the time. And now I just give it some instructions. It does it. I read it over. It looks good to me and I send it on, right? So so these people are always looking for ways to knock off hours off their day because they're working 60-hour weeks or whatever. And there you go. And so in Excel, same thing. Excel is all about writing formulas and whatever. So you can go into Excel and say, hey, I want to write a formula on this table to do X, and it's going to generate that for you. So, within Fabric here, it's the same story. In Power BI, well, that's all about generating reports. So it's all about, you give me an instruction, and I can go generate a report for you. But some other things just to kind of show real quick. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. And I'm going to go over to my warehouse again, because just another thing on the auto-generating SQL level here, bring this up. And if we look at our table structure, once again, I have that set of sales tables. So now I could say, hey, I want to do a new SQL query here. And I could say, yeah, show sales by product category. And so when I do that, so you see down at the bottom, it's saying completions is on. And I'm gonna go ahead and do this. And there you go, it generates the query. And then like you see a little button up here, where is it? Oh, here we go. So I'm gonna say, yeah, I'm gonna go accept that. So then I can go ahead and try it out here. And sometimes it gets a couple of things wrong, but let's see what it did this time around. Yeah, so there you go. So right there within the query interface, for your warehouse, it lets you type in natural language and generates the SQL. So same concept as the data agent feature, right? But right over here, just me perusing the data and things like that. So that's one. And then the other one's the dreaded DAX, like anybody who's done Power BI for a long time and they have to learn the DAX language. Well, let me come and walk over here real quick. And I just want to show this because I think this is pretty cool because I don't want to learn another language myself at this point. So let's go with this semantic model here. And you'll see up here, I have this little button here to go write DAX queries against this. And so, take a moment to load here. And now I can, do the same thing here. I can say I want to use Copilot for my DAX, and I want to say over here now I've got probably like let's say show sales by location. And you'll see here in a moment, same thing. It's going to generate the DAX query for that. You can try it out and see does it work and all those things. And so yeah, this is like I said, you can go outside of Fabric and do this stuff, with GPT and other large language models. Since they're trained on the internet, once again, they've seen lots of code out there. So you can go out there and say, hey, write a DAX query, and it's probably going to get it right or close to it. But the point here is if I'm in here working in Fabric, I have it right here at my fingertips, all in the same interface and everything. So just saves you time of jumping back and forth between that. And hopefully you notice today as I'm jumping around all these different parts of Fabric, I was in one screen that whole time, right? Like up until that very end there where it popped out a new thing for the DAX window for some reason. But yeah, that's kind of the other power of it here is think of, SQL Server warehousing stack. I've got my database interface here with Management Studio, and I'm over here in Visual Code, for doing my SSIS packages, and I'm popping around doing all these different things. It's like here, you're just inside one interface here, and everything gets stored into the same, workspace, so hopefully you saw that too, is workspaces were a concept that came from Power BI. And just the history here a little bit, when we set out to build Fabric, and I shouldn't say we, I had nothing to do with it, but Microsoft built Fabric, they said like, well, who's been really successful at data within Microsoft for the last 10 years? And they looked around and said like, well, our Power BI team, right? It's like it's really taken over the market and things like that. They're doing something right. So if we're going to build a whole new data platform, why don't we start with that as our basis and our end game, right? Instead of saying, let's build a bigger, faster database, things like that, like instead of that being the goal, which they did that as well. I mean, this stuff is extremely fast, can handle petabytes of data and all those things, but the gist of it, though, is how do we solve these age-old problems of the reports that don't match up and things like, hey, if I want to get started working on data, something I didn't really show here because it's not a Fabric demo, but if I want a lake house to start doing things, all I do is go to my workspace, I say new item, give me a lake house, I give it a name, and it's up and running in 5 seconds. Right. So that's to me, that's the time to market factor that in the past I said, hey, I have to wait for my VM administrator to go build a server for me. And maybe they've got that really streamlined. I work at some companies where they've got that down pat now. But I had another time even at the one company where we had a pretty good warehouse going. And we said, now we need a second server. Like it's, we can't keep giving it more CPU cores and literally waited a year and a half for that because they just didn't have it available in the host to go build another server. And so we had to wait, right? With this, this is cloud technology, so there's no limitation like that. But even more so than like platform as a service, where you still have to stand up things like the data lake storage and all that. With this, it's all packaged right into the environment. So you just stand up Fabric and you've got it all. And that's to me like the mind-blowing thing about it. And I always say, like, I did this basic training they put together when it first was released, and it takes you about 10 hours to get through all of it, but it has some really nice hands-on labs and everything. And like I said, it's 10 hours of stuff, but when you get done with that, I was sitting there blown away because I was like, how do they pull this off? I mean, because I'm standing up a database in 5 seconds. I'm now over here, like, I need to build Power BI. I don't have no idea how to do that. Type in a question and I've got a report, right? And so, how they just mingled all this stuff together and made it work is just kind of mind blowing. Yeah. But it's because they started with the Power BI team in the end game. They didn't say bigger, faster database, fancy features on data engineering. Not that there aren't those too, but they said that let's keep focus here. The end game is ease of building reports, ease of building machine learning models for a data scientist and all those things, right? So anyway, hopefully this gives you some ideas anyway. I mean, if you haven't tried out Fabric yet, I mean, you might have some issues depending on how you're set up at your company. But obviously just reach out to your Microsoft rep if you want to try things. There actually is a trial version of Fabric. You get 60 days for free, and it's what's called an F64 level of compute. That's the compute level where you get the full feature set of Fabric. So when you do a trial, you do get most of the feature set, except as of now, I think you still don't get those co-pilots as part of that trial. But other than that, you get everything else. So um, yeah, and like I said, it's 60 days, and you're not limited to one per company either. Really, it's per user. Now they're not going to let you do 1,000 of these within a company, and I don't even know what the magic number is. It's not documented or anything, but it does say in the documentation that yeah, you can do multiple of these. But usually, I say if you're doing a POC, keep it to one and share it amongst people to start. And if you're running out of that 60 days, you could stand up another one and keep going, that kind of thing. But yeah. But to me, I think of it this way with the AI skills, now a data agents feature. I have to get myself to start calling it that after a week now. But um, I look at it this way. It's like, so I'll just be blunt, like what the cost of Fabric is. It's all public knowledge here. If I do an F64 level where I get the full feature set, that's going to cost you $5,000 a month. And that means you get the full feature set, co-pilots, everything, and it's a pretty nice level of compute, and you can do a lot of things. So, and that's, like the list price for it is 8,000 a month, but if you do a reservation for a year, then it brings the cost down to 5,000 a month. To me, I think of like, okay, that's 60,000 a year. How many software packages have you bought that cost 60,000 a year or more? I mean, a ton, right? And some of them just very niche things, even that cost you 250 grand a year, things like that. I look at this and say, even if I didn't want Power BI, I'm using Tableau, I have Snowflake, I don't want to build a data warehouse in here or any of those things. I look at it and say, like, well, this data agent thing, is that something like that out of the box worth 60 grand a year? That's up to you to decide, right? But that's how I think about it. I go, I've just seen the wasteful money thrown away at applications over the years. And this, I go like, man, putting a chatbot in front of my people with all the data we have, that's just mind blowing. And the cost could be that, so something to think about. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's there. That feature's been there for over a year now, and it went generally available sometime in the last year, but it's been generally available for quite a while now. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, when I first started showing it, it was still in public pre, or actually it was even in private preview, but at Fabric conference last year, they showed it publicly to everybody, literally. So I went, we're not supposed to show private preview stuff in general, but I went ahead and started showing it to people. I was like, we showed it at the conference. So I was like, I just at least want to give people, because of me, that's such a mind-blowing feature in the stack there, right? But yeah. Well, any further thoughts or questions or anything? Well, that's all I got. I mean, I'm ending 5 minutes short. Sorry if I'm cheating you out of an extra 5 minutes here, but